Hello, my name is Andrew Shahan. I am an early childhood special educator here in the United States in San Francisco. And I've been working with children with autism, children with developmental disabilities, and families for about the last 30 years. And I'm very excited and honored that I have the opportunity to have a conversation with Guy Shahar, who started the Transforming Autism Project a few years ago. And Guy and I are just going to have a conversation about his experience, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to get to know him a little bit more. And Guy and I connected about a year ago and have had some wonderful conversations over the course of that year. So again, I feel like I always learn and I always grow every time I get a chance to talk to Guy. So I'm very excited to just to have this opportunity together with Guy.
One thing that I wonder about is, since your experience at MIFNI, now that was now years ago, some years ago.
Yeah, 20.
So yeah, it was 2011.
8 years.
Yeah. So almost a decade ago or so. But I wonder then, since that experience, what your journey has been like with Daniel, especially in terms of trying to be the best parent, father that you can be, also knowing that that the social world is going to not always be so welcoming and so sensitive and supportive,
Yeah.
Of Daniel, and that he's at times going to struggle still.
Yeah. It's been a bumpy ride. It's been a very bumpy story. So we went to Israel to the MIFNI Center when he was 1. He was just over 2. He was 2 1/4. When we arrived, it was a really stressful journey just to get there, just to get into the aeroplane. There was lots of screaming. We thought we were going to we'd get thrown off the plane. He didn't want to leave his pushchair. It was all quite chaotic. The only reason we didn't get thrown off the plane is because he cried himself to sleep.
Wow.
as one of the people was approaching us to ask us to leave. So we got on the plane. When we came back, it was a totally different story. He marched proudly up to the door, walked onto the plane with us hand in hand, sat down. He was enjoying the whole experience, very happy to give up his pushchair. And for the following months and few years, that trajectory continued. We continued the work that they were doing there and that we were learning to do there. We continued that with him, both formally, in a room alone with him for several hours a day, which was really hard work, but very, very positive work as well, because you could really see it bearing fruit. And then when he started to go to nursery, and then when he started to go to school, we didn't do so much formal stuff in the room. That was phased out, but we'd integrated a lot of what we'd learned to do in the room into daily life anyway. And that whole understanding of him has totally, transformed the way that we interact with him. So it's like we've almost not been angry with him for his whole life, which is, which is unusual for any parent, but it's come directly from what we learned when he was very small, and how we've learned to see him and how we've learned to understand him and respond to him. So the first few years he went to a mainstream school, which was pretty overwhelming for him at the beginning, because it was very busy, hectic, a lot of activity. It was a big school. But his attitude was, I want to do this. I'm going to do this. He had this determination. Wow. And he had, and he had this, real openness from the day he came back from MIFNI, actually. And he became so interested in the world and so trusting of other people as well. There was once we were on the bus, and a lady on the bus started talking to him, and he was very happy about it. And then the woman said, "Okay, it's time to go now." And he gave her his hand. He was ready to go with her, you know, because he was so delighted that that someone had spoken to him, and you know, he was so happy for any sort of interaction. And so he was so happy and so full of anticipation to go to school, and he was so determined to make it work that he did make it work. And you know, he became used to the sensory challenges, and he overcame them. And you know, they were stopping his academic ability at the beginning as well, and he was right at the bottom of his class. And you know, within a couple of years, he was really excelling, and he was at the top of his class because you know, he put the effort in, and he had that joy of going to school. What happened then was that you know, his way of communicating was a little different still from the other children. And when he was about 6, 7, it led to the start of a bullying incident. So the other children in the school were, you know, in his class were quite unkind to him in a low-level way, but continuously over a long period of time. And that, you know, that led to another regression. So it led to another withdrawal, and a very, very difficult and painful period for him, and for us, of course, as well. So then we moved him purely for that reason, purely for that social reason, to an autism school. And he's been there since last year, and you know, he's again rediscovering his joy in life and his happiness, although he does still carry the marks of what's essentially a trauma for him, a very deep trauma.
Yeah, of course. Of course, that's the case, right? Where and that's one of the things I see so often in my work is how many children on the spectrum are suffering from social interactions with people who, for many reasons, decide to target them and bully them, and it can be very, very painful for families as well as for children to be on the receiving end of bullying. And I think one of the incredibly challenging things that I see is that it's almost like it's important to have this incredible sensitivity to our children, and to really interact with them in ways that is sensitive, that also tunes into some of their vulnerabilities, and makes interaction a bit easier for individuals with autism. But then what then also can happen is that in a way, some of our kids can get a perspective about the social world that's maybe not always so accurate, right? That we can interact in ways that are again sort of more fine-tuned, more sensitive, more supportive. But then when they approach someone that is not tuned into their unique communication style, or some of their maybe sensory overload, or whatever it might be, it almost can be even more jarring, because perhaps their expectations of the social world are that people will meet them where they are and not be so judgmental and not be perhaps harsh. So I think about that all the time in my own work, how important it is to do both, to really try to help kids develop like social resilience and an ability to almost handle environments or situations or people that are not going to be supportive and accommodating. And that's a really hard thing to do, to balance.
Yes.
And so I wonder about your perspective on that, and how you and your wife are trying to do that with.
It's exactly, it's a really, really difficult balance. First of all, I want to say that, you know, what you were saying about children being affected by the social interactions that they've had. And very often children close down because of that, and children shut themselves off and protect themselves from what they see as very dangerous social interactions. And the sad thing about it, it's all very sad, but one sad thing about it is that people then look at what the behavior that they're exhibiting by protecting themselves and go, oh, that's autism.
That's right.
Autistic people protect themselves from social interaction. That's just part of the condition. That's what they're neurologically wired to do. But it's not true. I know that that's not true. I know it's not the case because I've seen, you know, Daniel, my son, has been very lucky to have opportunities to be in a situation, to be in situations where there wasn't that risk, where he didn't feel threatened. And his social interaction in those situations has been what anybody would consider as standard in social interaction. The avoidance comes because, and this goes back to autism being about sensitivity, the avoidance comes when that sensitivity hasn't been respected, and they're carrying the trauma of that sensitivity not having been respected, and they're carrying the fear, the very real and justified fear, that that sensitivity is not going to be respected next time as well. They have every reason to protect themselves. Anybody would protect themselves if they were faced with that sort of very, very profound threat that they perceived. So sorry, I just thought of that when you talked about the children being affected by the social interaction. You asked me something different though, and I can't remember. Oh, the balance about resilience. Yes, and that's one of the challenges. It's like, you know, if my son has, you know, sometimes he gets fearful about certain things that it's not rational to be fearful about, and it's like, to what extent do I encourage him to take a bold step forward and recognize that the fears that he has are not justified? You know, if I don't do that enough, I'm letting him down by not giving him the opportunities to grow that he needs, by not giving him that support that only a parent can give him to grow and to become resilient and to overcome the irrational fears that he's got. He needs that and he wants it. But if I do it too much, I'm letting him down as well by pushing him, by making it overwhelming for him, by putting too many demands on him. And as a parent, getting that balance is something you have to be totally, you know, you'll never get it right, but you need to be totally conscious of all the time.
Absolutely, Guy. And I think that's, from what I see, that's also one of the greatest challenges for parents of children on the spectrum, is not only trying to find that balance, but then being accepting of one's own limitations, challenges, mistakes.
Yeah.
And I think that in many ways, the well-intentioned field of autism education, treatment, etc., has I think unintentionally sent a very even toxic message to parents, right? That there's like a right way to do it, and there are all these techniques and the evidence-based, and so parents are left feeling, from what I continue to learn about families and parents that are doing their best to raise children on the spectrum, parents can absolutely turn that inward and blame themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
For not being good enough, not doing what they should be doing to support their kids. And so I think this has been a major problem, especially in the US, where our approach to autism has been very sort of medical model based, where the therapist kind of fixes, treats the child, and then supposedly kind of trains the parents on all of these, like the proper techniques for how to do it. It really sets up, I think, it can really set parents up to feel like they're failing.
Yeah.
And so I wonder for for you and in your experience, like what helps you, what keeps you going as a dad, as a parent under some of those conditions? Because every parent is gonna at some point is gonna feel those things.
Yeah.
And I think that can really, I've seen that really, like, how can I say, really level parents, really in some ways shut parents down, and in some
Yeah.
cases really disconnect parents
Yeah.
from the whole experience of being present and raising their kids. So you can imagine this, right? There's so many dads that I've had opportunities to work with that sometimes in some ways just give up and disengage from
Yeah.
trying to father or parent their child, because they feel like they just can't, they're not getting it right, they can't do it. And most, from my experience, most men like to be involved in things where we get some kind of feedback that, like, we can do something right, or we're contributing. And when that's not happening as a dad, I think sometimes parents, especially fathers, can really disengage from that incredibly challenging task and job. And of course that has really not good long-term consequences. So I'm asking this because you've had your own experience with this, and I think I always wonder, like, what's kept you going, and how have you dealt with some of those
Yeah.
challenges as a dad? Yeah.
Well, first, I want to say that, I don't want to claim that I'm anything special with this. I've been extremely fortunate, probably in the most fortunate 0.001% of parents, to have been exposed to, and to have been given a chance to assimilate and to absorb into myself some really good understanding about children. It's not come from me. It's because I've been exposed to that, and I'm extremely grateful for that. And even with that, I mess up all the time. I get things wrong all the time, or I think I'm doing a great job, and then I look back a year later and go, God, I can't believe I did that. So yes, that just to put me into context. So I'm not talking as someone who's got it all mastered.
Of course.
But guilt is, we have to avoid guilt. Guilt is the most destructive force, because what happens when you're guilty, when you feel guilty, is you're giving yourself all sorts of negative messages. They're just there inherently. They're things like, I have failed, I'm not a good parent, I can't bring up my child. This stuff, when you feel guilty, is going on unconsciously. And what happens when you're reinforcing those beliefs in yourself is they get stronger and stronger and stronger, and they guarantee continued failure. The only way to manage guilt is to really find some way, and I'm not saying it's easy, find some way to take a step back from the situation and just tell the truth about the situation, because the truth is never for anybody, I failed. The truth is never for anybody, I'm not good enough, or I can't bring up my child. To really sort of put those truths into themselves, I think that's probably the best way. What helps me with that? Again, it's something, it's something that has been given to me, I guess, in a way. I think that I do heartfulness meditation. I've been doing it for 20 years now. I think that more than anything has enabled me to arrive at a condition where it's very rare for me to feel guilty. And to really understand the power that guilt has to destroy people's potential.
Wow. That's so clearly said. I don't know that I've heard anyone yet, at least, that parents that I've spoken with, really spotlight so much how destructive guilt can be. And but as I'm applying it, thinking about a lot of the families that I've worked with, you're exactly right that so many families can get really stuck there. And then it's the loop feeds on itself in many ways, right? The negative thoughts, it's my fault and I'm bad. And
then the next thing is that feeds into a cycle of failure. And then the failure is further evidence to justify the guilt.
Yeah. Yeah. That's incredibly important. And so, you know, it sounds like for you especially, your meditation practice has really helped you to perhaps just recognize some of those thoughts, let them go, and also perhaps develop more compassion, acceptance for yourself and who you are and what goes through your mind and your heart on any given day.
It's a condition that develops naturally through doing the meditation over a period of time.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, Guy, because I also have a meditation practice, and I believe the same is true for me. That I've become much more compassionate towards myself as a professional, and more accepting of my own mistakes and limitations and quirkiness, my own stuff, and I don't get as stuck when I'm for example working with a particular family or group of professionals, and I feel like I'm not doing my best, or I get stuck, or things don't go as I hoped. So I think there's a lot of really important stuff there, and I think that what I see so often in my own work, that even if families don't develop like a meditation practice or have a path that involves that kind of opportunity, a big part of my work is really focused now on video, and really using video of interactions between parents and their children to help parents develop what my mentor would call a new self picture. And I'm grateful to Maria Arts and her approach, which is called Martimeo, which means on one's own strength, to really helping, she really kind of since the 70s has been developing this particular way of working with certainly with families as well as professionals to strengthen their interactions with individuals with a huge range of unique communication styles, social challenges, whatever it might be, and really the most powerful component is helping parents as well as professionals see their own strengths in their interactions with either their own child or the people that they're serving. And I wonder about your experience with that, especially through not only through the MIFNI clinic, but also if you've been able to do that as well, to perhaps generate for yourself a picture of yourself as a as a dad or as a person, where you're able to even on your at sometimes your most difficult times, you can still see like your own strengths, your own abilities, uniqueness as a person, any of that. I wonder if you've had an experience like that that's helped you.
Not in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess maybe. I mean, I guess maybe this is something that's also come out of the meditation practice, is that I don't really focus on myself so much, on whether I'm doing a good job or a bad job. It goes for, bringing up Daniel. It goes for running the charity. It goes for what I write. It's just, I have a job to do, and I need to do it. And I need to do it to the best of my ability. I don't control what my ability is. If I do it to the best of my ability and it doesn't work, well, in all of these things, there's nobody else to do that job anyway. So it's only academic to worry about whether I'm doing a good job or not. I'm doing the best job that I can. But I guess that is, implicitly,
Yes.
a, a level of self-acceptance, I guess. And you know, it wouldn't make sense to put impossible demands on myself. It wouldn't make sense to put demands on myself to be better than I am in any of those areas, because the only thing that would do would be to invite guilt and to undermine and to bring the best that I can be down.
Yes.
Whereas if I have the acceptance, it gives it space to grow. But you can't just say to someone, have acceptance. It's part of a condition that everybody needs to evolve into in their own way.
Right. And I mean, I love what you said, Guy, about being able to think about it as you're always doing the very best that you can. And I think that's where people, when people lose sight of that, that's when things can get incredibly, in some ways where I see, like, we can all be our worst enemies, right? When we're not seeing that we're doing the very best job, because that's where the regret and the guilt and all that whole cycle comes in, right? And I think that maybe in a way, that's also what you're well, I don't know, this is a question. Is that one of the things that you are also then trying to help Daniel develop? That sense that he's always doing the very best that he can, and maybe he already has that approach, or that sort of.
I think implicitly, yeah, implicitly that is what we're trying to do. It's like we don't frame it like that and think of it like that, but yes, absolutely. What we're very explicit. You know, there's one sort of thing, one almost a mantra that I tell him all the time and try to get him to live by, which is everything's okay. Whatever happens, everything's okay. And implicitly that's saying you're strong enough to deal with everything. You've got the resilience, you've got the capability, you've got the flexibility, even if you don't think you have, to deal with whatever comes along and know that it's not as devastating as it might initially feel.
Wow. And then, of course, I think about what you just said, Guy. If when Daniel looks up at you and your wife and sees that in your face, or hears that in your tone of voice, that you believe in him, and in that strongly, that sincerely, that deeply, I really believe that he carries that with him. And I think this is what we also know from years of research in child development, that when children have an adult that they've had that experience with, maybe just one, and it maybe not even a parent, right? Someone who really believes deeply in them and gives them the message that that you can do this, and I know, you know, and everything's going to be okay. You're okay. That has a profound ripple effect.
And it's the sincerity. It's the sincerity that he picks up. That's the key part of it. So I don't know how you would do research on that, because it could be quite skewed. Because if a parent says everything's okay, you're fine, don't worry about it, and they're not really believing and feeling that themselves, then the child is going to be, all right. They're going to know. They're going to know. And you know, my theory is that autistic children are even more sensitive, even more perceptive, and able to tune into the underlying feelings and beliefs and sincerity of other people. So if it's said without sincerity, it might as well not be said.
And I think that I've seen that in my own experience over and over and over again, that sometimes when parents are overwhelmed and stressed and pushing themselves, that, you know, they can, the words can come out, we're fine, everything's fine, you're good, I'm good, and in some way they're trying to convince themselves of that without really feeling it or believing it. And I think that I've certainly seen many children, whether they have autism or not, or they're excuse me, typically developing, they pick up all of that, that they can see and feel in their parents' facial expression, tone of voice, body language, the stress, not the calm, confident reassurance, because it's not there, even
Yeah.
if the parent is trying to say the right thing.
And it's damaging. That's damaging in so many ways, because it's damaging because at least if you don't say it, the question doesn't necessarily come up. If you bring the question up and then by what you're feeling, give them the answer that thing that you're telling them isn't true, then they're getting a message that they need to absorb whether they want to or not, although they probably would anyway. It also gives them a real sense of unease and insecurity about the social world, because they're having somebody who they really trust to be their guide, who's telling them one thing and believing another, and there's that mismatch. And so how can I trust anything that anybody says? Yeah.
And I think that is one of, and I look forward to more of your writing or perspective about this particular topic or issue, Guy, because I think it's so powerful how, for many reasons, especially I consider myself a neurotypical person, so I'm coming at this from my own lens, but I know that neurotypical people oftentimes can learn and can be trained to make statements or say things that are completely inconsistent with what I'm feeling or what we're feeling on the inside.
Almost expected.
Yes. And again, like that happens for many reasons. For example, in my own case, I grew up in a family where my parents always did the very best that they could, but they didn't have necessarily their own role models that were showing how you could speak from your own emotions and your experience in a very open and honest way that wasn't really allowed or permitted. So generations can pass on this way of being in the world where there's a complete disconnect between what you're saying publicly and what you're feeling on the inside. And it in many ways, it sounds like this is part of what can be so incredibly confusing for someone on the spectrum for whom it perhaps is more difficult to learn how to communicate in that very disconnected way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You could say it's difficult for them to communicate, and so they have a weakness, or you could turn it the other way around and say they have the strength of being able to perceive things that are sincere and aren't sincere, and to be able to discriminate between the two, and to be ready and willing to build a world which is based on sincerity, which is based on openness, where there's no judgment, so there's nothing to hide. These are things that anybody would say that they wanted in the world, but it's the autistic person that's ready to bring them, that's ready to put their money where their mouth is and bring them. And so it's a strength that the autistic person brings, and it's a weakness that everybody else brings, I guess, that we have to argue and say things that we don't mean, and represent ourselves in ways that other people have to work out, which is not always an obvious thing to do. I just need to remind you we have about 10 minutes left. Sorry.
Yes, and thank you, Guy, because I'm so absorbed in our conversation that I also lost track of time. And the last thing I'll say is that I've always really admired, even though, of course, as we know, it can cause social tension or social misunderstandings or awkwardness in many ways. I've always so respected and even admired the ability of people on the spectrum, children, young adults, teenagers, whatever, to say what they're thinking and feeling without being without censoring it to to cater to the people around them. And so I've always thought, I wish I could do that more. I wish I could sometimes maybe speak more honestly, openly, directly from my experience versus thinking, whoops, I don't want to ruffle too many feathers here. And I think it's a way, like you said, that people with autism can be in some ways mistreated, misunderstood, and then ultimately, sort of hurt as a result. But it's something that, like you're saying, in many ways would be so great for the rest of the world to learn how to do more, to be more authentic, right?
Right.
And so it seems like, again, the message is we have a lot of work to do, like to learn from one another, and in some ways create a world that just is more understanding
It
and
works
more,
for everybody.
right?
Because I think that the ideals that autistic people bring, these are the ideals that everybody would profess to have. And some people say, oh, why should we make accommodation for just such a small amount of people? You make accommodation for them, one, because you're a human being and you care about the experience of other human beings. But also another really big reason is because the sorts of changes you would make to accommodate an autistic person are exactly the sort of changes you would make to bring about a better world that you would be more comfortable living in.
Wow. Yes. I mean, indeed, really, I really appreciate that last sentence, Guy. And I think that that's what I strive to do in all of my interactions with people in general, but people on the spectrum in particular. And I know we're going to, at least for now, end the interview, but I just want to say thank you. I feel always like I just learn so much when I talk with you, and I appreciate your honesty, Guy, and your willingness to share your experience with me and with anyone that sees this interview. And thanks for everything that you've taught me, and I really look forward to what's to come in the next months, weeks, years, whatever, in terms of you sharing your perspective and more people hearing your perspective, because I think it will really raise the bar in terms of the care, the support that we're all able to provide for people on the spectrum and everybody. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And you're a great interviewer, by the way, because when this started, I actually had nothing to say. I was like, what am I going to say in this interview? And you very, very expertly brought, you should be a radio presenter or a television.
Maybe a side career someday. But as I said, it's easy, very easy to do with you, Guy, because I enjoy our connection and our conversation so much. So really, it was a pleasure, and I look forward to again always like reading your next article, and who knows, maybe your next TED Talk, if it unfolds naturally, of course.
Of course. Thank you, Andrew.
Yes. So we'll do it again, and thank you again, and take good care, Guy, and happy holidays, of course.